Welcome to It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, brought to you by the Fundraising Lab. Over the next 3 months, we will be highlighting some of our favorite episodes that we think deserve to be heard again, or for some of you, the very first time. We'll be back with brand new episodes in September, but we hope you enjoy these great conversations. Without further ado, here's Cathy.
Welcome to It Doesn't Hurt to Ask, a podcast where we talk about fundraising. This season we'll be talking to shift disturbers in philanthropy, people who are shaking up traditional philanthropy practices. Simone Joyaux has been shift disturbing in philanthropy since 1975 and celebrated her 32nd anniversary as a fundraising consultant in January of 2019. Simone was my teacher at St. Mary's when I did my master's later in life, and we had lots of fun debating issues in class. I can't wait to see what this conversation is like. Simone Joyaux, I'm so delighted to welcome you to It Doesn't Hurt to Ask podcast.
Well, I'm excited about this too.
I'm really looking forward to talking shift about philanthropy with you.
Exactly.
So I was delighted when you agreed to be a guest on this show because I bang on quite a lot about social change philanthropy, and I see you really as being the grande dame of social philanthropy, which I think is appropriate because you speak French and you're a grande dame.
Oh, merci beaucoup.
So I love social change philanthropy. It's what gets me excited about being involved in philanthropy. But not everybody really understands what that term means. So why don't we start by you telling us what you think social change philanthropy is?
So what I think it is the choice on behalf of the donor, of course, and the choice on behalf of an organization to go to the root causes of things. And so to try to intervene there.
Okay.
And I think that it's interesting because I find it funny that you would think of me as the grande dame of this sort of thing, because I always think of you as one of the people that I was impressed with who did that and kind of helped me, I'm serious, on my journey. And I think what happened was, you know, I'm known as somebody in traditional philanthropy.
Yeah.
And I began with arts organizations, and I love arts organizations, and I want money to go there, and I want money to go to the environment, and everywhere. But I started to begin to be really uncomfortable with, okay, that's all fine and dandy, but we're not going to the real cause of some problem. So in 2000, for example, I founded the Women's Fund of Rhode Island, which was all about leveling the playing field.
Okay.
So it's about going back and saying, well, it's not good enough, as far as I'm concerned, to save the drowning babies or whatever. Yes, we have to have that kind of philanthropy. We have to, but to keep putting Band-Aids on things forever and not going to the root cause makes me deeply sad and deeply angry. So when I think of social change, the concept is we're trying to change society or the rules, etc., etc.
Yeah.
And we do that by looking at the situation and saying, what's causing this? Because we can't just compensate for it.
Right. So I have a colleague or friend, Rosemary Oliver from Amnesty International, who said, I don't want to create a world with better conditions. I want to create a better world.
Yes, very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. I mean, I always keep saying to people, it's your choice. I mean, philanthropy is voluntary action for the common good. So if you, whoever the you is, want desperately to have more theater and more cutting edge theater, then by golly, give your money there. Mm-hmm. That's an aspiration you want to fulfill. I'm not here to say, oh, you should give to this instead of that.
Yeah.
It's the very same thing if you say, well, you know, I had a scholarship to go to university and I want that available for other people. I certainly hope people are giving money for health care changes. And I'm thinking about, like, could we eliminate cancer? Wouldn't that be wonderful, right? Let's always remember, as we keep saying, the starving millions. But see, I don't want to just give money to the food pantry and the homeless shelter. I want to pay people a living wage.
Yeah.
and all that sort of stuff. And so I think we need both. And I feel like the history of philanthropy, if you're not reading a specifically social change, social justice book, it never talks about that sort of thing in regular philanthropy.
We've known each other for a number of years, but I went back to school later in life and did my master's at St. Mary's where you teach. And it was interesting to me that a lot of the books that we were given to read, not so much in your course, but in some of the other courses, it was all traditional philanthropy. There was it was like social change philanthropy didn't exist. And in fact, I remember in one course raising the issue because I had decided when I went in that what I wanted to do was really just think and talk about nothing but social change philanthropy for any of the assignments that I was going to do and the research that I was going to do. And so in one course, I said, so how would what you're talking about be done differently if you were working in social change versus traditional philanthropy? And I got blank stares. Mm-hmm. So
I wrote this piece called Philanthropy's Moral Dilemma back in 2006 or something like that. And the whole point was, I think there are, in essence, two kinds of philanthropy. There's the, I want to go to the head of the river and stop whoever's throwing the babies in the river.
Right.
As opposed to going to rescue the babies from the river.
Right. And you're referring to a really common story that's told in the social justice sector around somebody sees babies floating in the river, goes and gets them, fishes them out. Somebody else comes along, runs to the headwater, and tries to figure out why babies are in there in the first place. Yep.
So to me, we need both.
Yeah.
And so when I made the decision, sort of like, I'm going to start integrating both in everything I do, everything I present, everything I write or teach. So it can be something as simple as, I want our history of philanthropy and fundraising to talk about both. I want people to choose to rescue the babies. I want them to, give to stop cancer, all those sorts of things. But I also want other people to say, and I've chosen to do a lot of this, I'm not going to rescue the babies because there's bunches of you doing it, thank heavens. I'm going to the head of the river to figure out who the hell is throwing them in, and my goal is to stop them.
Right. I really love what you said there because I think that oftentimes when I have discussions about social change philanthropy, there's this sense that it is either or. And the truth is that in most organizations that are doing social change philanthropy, you can't not engage in some traditional philanthropy.
Right.
And it's not like the practices are different, it's just how you apply them are different.
Right. And I really think that I think some of it is short-term thinking, as in we've got to rescue the trees now. Yes, we do. We have to rescue the animals now. But if we also don't go back and figure out why all of this is happening, we won't ever be able to stop it. So some of it's short-term thinking. We have an immediate need to rescue the babies, to et cetera, et cetera. I also think a huge part of this is what we will not talk about out loud. And I'm watching it in a program I'm doing right now where, we can't talk about political things. So first there's the, oh dear, we'll get in trouble with government. But in fact, no, we won't. You just can't endorse a candidate. Yeah. But you can say that the law is terrible.
Right.
I mean, and the biggest reason I believe why we don't want to talk about this stuff is because, remember Bob? Big Bob.
Bob?
I'm just using any name. Big Bob.
Big Bob. And Big Bad Bob.
Yes, well, but so just right now he's only Big Bob.
Okay.
And he has, he's the head of the largest company in Ontario.
Okay.
And in addition, he serves on everybody's board and his connections are just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And Big Bob, doesn't really want to get into any controversial things. And remember, he's our largest donor and we just don't dare.
Yeah.
I once had a client, a CEO of a family service organization, say to me that it always amuses him that his donors give money to compensate for, to serve people who those very donors and board members are screwing in their businesses.
Well, yeah, I mean, there is something to be said for one of the challenges of social change philanthropy is that people with wealth may have a vested interest in not supporting change that is going to impact their ability to maintain their wealth.
Yes, and even if it's not even that, it's so they're not necessarily even consciously sometimes, I think, donors saying, well, this will really hurt my business. I think there is a discomfort because then we end up on some level, we have to end up talking about race and gender identity and some of those things.
Well, and I think that it's in some cases it's not even so much that we have to talk about those uncomfortable topics, although yes, that is part of it. I don't even think it's necessarily that nefarious. Sometimes it's just really hard to make the case for social change because when you're making the case for traditional philanthropy, it's this implied relationship that we have with a donor where we say to the donor, if you invest X, here are the differences we're going to make, or here are here's the impact you're going to be able to help us achieve. In social change, you have to say to a donor, well, if you invest X, we're going to try a whole bunch of things. Maybe they'll work, maybe they won't work. And we're not even necessarily going to be able to report back to you to say that your money was the thing that made the difference because there's so many variables that influence social change.
Right. So the time span is different.
Yeah.
The measures are different. The immediate gratification of, I did this.
Yeah.
Right. It's all different. And it's questioning fundamental beliefs and biases we all have.
Well, I think I also want to bring it back to that notion of trying to, invite people to support social change philanthropy and the timeline being so long. Part of the challenge is the timeline is long. We know a lot of things about philanthropy and that kind of instant gratification, and the paradigm that we work in right now is very entrenched. And so donors have learned that as a paradigm as well as professionals. And so part of the challenge is how do we engage donors differently in the philanthropic process.
Yeah.
And we don't have rules for that right now, and we don't have rules. We don't have best practices for that right now. We don't have a lot of precedents. So I think we have a lot of learning to do about how do we deliver these messages about social change philanthropy differently in such a way that they will engage people and inspire people to want to get involved.
Talk about interesting possible research, okay?
Yeah. Any students listening or any researchers out there listening?
Yes, exactly. So here we are. We get a tax deduction, but we also know from research that most people are not giving money in any country for a tax deduction.
Right.
That's just not a priority. It's like at the lowest. So what is the story we tell? So we're really good at the C3 stories. But the C4 stories, so in the U.S., C4, the gift is not tax deductible.
Okay. So that's a nonprofit here. Just a general run-of-the-mill nonprofit.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
And one of the things C4s can do as a subset,
Yeah.
all right? So they can endorse, advocate for legislation, all right?
Yeah.
But in addition, they can also set up a political action committee where they endorse candidates.
Okay.
Now, I have seen over the years organizations who do C3 work and are hugely popular.
Yeah.
Everybody is giving to them, okay? At this cause. To do the program angle.
Yeah.
Those same everybody's who are giving to that cause
Yeah.
for the program C3 tax deductible angle don't give to the C4 or the political action angle. Now, granted, so it's not tax deductible, but really, you can't tell me those people wouldn't give. I'm more interested in what is the story we're forgetting to tell them. What is the gap between understanding that in many cases?
Can I just say,
Yes,
though, so it's interesting as you're saying that, I'm reflecting on a conversation I had with someone once who worked in the world of food banking, and the organization was also trying to do some social change kind of activities. And she said it was so much easier to engage donors to give to the food bank because people understood what that meant.
Right.
And it was much more difficult to engage them in this longer term strategic stuff that they were trying to do. And so, and I think there's some great, wonderful research out there. And when you do it, please let me know, whoever ends up doing this.
Yes. Well, because it's like, okay, so here was the food bank, but we also are trying to train you to get a job, and we get a living wage. And so I've watched in the United States where there are towns, cities, states trying to get living wage laws through, which would then reduce
the
need
for
food bank.
Yeah. Famously, we had a living wage pilot program in Ontario that was recently ended.
Well, so there it is the politics, the public policy stops the other stuff.
Yeah. So it's interesting you say that, because one of the challenges that, as I see it, is that many organizations working in the realm of social change are small. We're in this fragmented sector.
Absolutely.
So we have the sector that is trying to address some of the most intractable social issues is small and fragmented, which means it does not have a voice at the table where the big kids are trying to change policy. And so we're tasked with some of the most difficult work, but not being engaged to suggest solutions. Or if we're being engaged to suggest solutions, we're being ignored a lot of the time, or they're not being heard.
So it begs a whole bunch of questions, it seems to me. So if there are bunches of different organizations working on, let's say, food insecurity. So you're the big behemoth.
Yeah.
I'm the smaller organization. What are the power dynamics between our organizations?
Yeah.
Because there's that, right?
Yeah. Even what are perceived as being the big behemoths in some of these sectors are pretty small.
Yes. Right. They're the big player, but they're already small sized anyway. Right.
Yeah.
And so then we're not necessarily very good at collaborating sometimes. So we make things worse by not opening up and saying, okay, everybody who's dealing with this issue, let's get together, let's create a collaborative model, and then I can't tell you the number of organizations, and I'm sure you've encountered this, where you're doing a workshop and someone has just founded an organization, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, sounds like a really cool organization, except you know that there are 3 others that are doing the very same thing. And I've actually asked those people, not in public, but, during the break, saying, so what kind of research did you know that there's this A, B, and C group? And they said no.
Yeah.
So now we have, instead of 2 really solid groups making shirts of a different color, we've got the red shirt people, the yellow shirt people, the blue shirt people.
Yeah. Because of what you said about we're not great at collaborating, I will just give a shout out to episode 1 of It Doesn't Hurt to Ask podcast with Sharon Avery, where she talks about a model that the Toronto Foundation is experimenting with around just that collective fundraising.
Wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah, so collaboration and services, to what degree can we do collective fundraising, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's going to be a really important next stage for the world of philanthropy. And I actually think that organizations engaged in social change philanthropy are well positioned to be leaders in this notion of collective fundraising.
Yes, because one would hope that they're already collectively working on the issues.
Yes, and they do. I mean, having worked in that sector for so many years, I know that so many of these groups are already collaborating behind the scenes quietly. I used to work for a literacy organization. I remember a funder bringing me and some other literacy organizations to the table and thought she was doing a really great thing and said, we really want you to collaborate more. And we said, well, we're already collaborating. I mean, we're running our programs at their library and the library's doing this. Like, we're all interconnected in this world.
And the funder didn't know that.
Yeah. And it's, it's not the funder's area of expertise, but I think that we already collaborate. So why not take it one step further and figure out how to be leaders in philanthropy collaboration?
Yeah.
I love that. So earlier you talked about having written something about philanthropy's moral dilemma.
Yes.
I took note of that so that I could come back to it. Tell me about that.
So it's available in my free download library, but it's the final chapter of Keep Your Donors.
Yeah.
Published in 2008, that Tom Ahern and I wrote together. And so it was this whole thinking I was doing about the way we talk about fundraising, which, helps us produce philanthropy, fundraising and boards and all these things. Okay. And I had just read or reread Peggy McIntosh's work, The Invisible Knapsack of White Privilege.
Yeah.
And so I started thinking about, so here's philanthropy, this voluntary action for the common good, and we're trying to do all these good things. And then we use words like major gifts and major donors, which means there are minor gifts and minor donors. You can't say major without meaning that there's minor or less than.
Right. I can hear the eye rolling among some of the listeners right now.
I know.
And only so I'll play devil's advocate and ask you then if the terminology is exclusive. So and it is.
Yes.
Then what can we use that makes it inclusive, that still allows practitioners to focus on larger donations, because we know from all of the research and just experience that larger donations help us do more things, right?
Yes, but you walked into the trap.
I was set up that way. Okay.
So, the research shows also that the largest gift any person makes is a gift in their will.
Okay.
And the research shows that gifts in the will are given by loyal donors who may have been giving you $50 for 10 years. And then, because they love you so much, they leave a gift in the will.
So what about, there's this new breed of super philanthropists, or whatever you want to call them, who are making these very significant gifts.
Right.
And those of us who work in capital campaigns know that the math is just such that you need to secure a number of 6 and potentially 7-figure gifts in order to meet this really ambitious goal.
I just wish we wouldn't call them major donors, because it means there are minor donors. And I've actually heard donors say, well, so it said the major gift officer, and I don't know who to call because I don't think I'm a major donor. So, I mean, again...
Any suggestions for terminology changes?
Oh, I was thinking about this the other day, and I was going down bigger, less bigger, moderately bigger, but that seemed sort of inefficient.
Yeah.
And it's also hierarchical.
It's still, yeah.
So my biggest point is,
Yeah.
even if we keep using that language,
Yeah.
we need to be nurturing relationships with everyone. Yes, of course, we're going to spend more or less time in certain areas.
Yeah.
I just don't think it should be, and I don't think it's smart for it to be, well, the only criteria we're going to use for attention is how much they gave.
Right.
Because again, that takes care of this largest single gift I'm ever going to give, which could be in my will. And you don't recognize me for my loyalty.
Yeah.
All you do is put it under big gifts or little gifts. You don't have a good donor newsletter that goes to everyone. You're not treating me well. So anyway, yeah.
Well, so it's interesting because I've been working with a client recently, and we've been having this conversation, and it's almost like there's a belief that if what we call major donors are treated differently in terms of stewardship, that somehow the other donors within the organization will not be treated at all. And it's not either or. It shouldn't be either or, to your point. Like a good stewardship program reaches out to all donors.
Right.
And the business case makes sense to perhaps spend a different kind of energy on donors who can give you larger donations.
Right. So, it can't be mutually exclusive.
Right.
I mean, that's the key point. You can't say, well, I'm not going to do a donor newsletter because my boss won't let me because we don't have enough money. And we'll meet with our 10 top donors, so they don't need a newsletter. Well, that's really cool. Except for the top donor who doesn't ever want to meet, And so now not getting any kind of communications that tells you how you're spending her money. And then the donor who has no children and has been giving $50 a year for 10 years, but very rarely gets any kind of anything.
Right.
Even a special thank you letter, and it's like thinking, okay, well then I'll just leave my money someplace else. So there are minimal things that have to be done with everyone, regardless of gift size.
Right.
That to say that only big donors get to be invited to the special post-play party, and so the person who's been giving you $20 for a year for a decade isn't going to be invited. So let's not be so restrictive in our thinking, and let's test our thinking about how we would feel if we were talked about that way. So that's one part of philanthropy's moral dilemma, okay?
I do think that we as a sector have an opportunity to be more thoughtful about language. And,
yes,
and I will
absolutely.
give you an example of calling donors prospects. And this story comes from a colleague who told me a story about referring to prospects, and there was a prospective donor in the room who was quite offended, and they found out about it afterwards. They're not prospects. They are prospective donors.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
So, I think there's something to be said for us, and I know that it's shorthand, and it's language that we all understand, but language is important.
Yes.
And we need to think about what it means if our donors hear us speaking that way.
So when I think about philanthropy's moral dilemma, there is the language we use sometimes, the way we behave towards the larger donors and the not so large donors without concern for their engagement. It's the money piece, which is the way our society works. It's all about money. Then think about board members. And so who do we recruit for board members? Well, people with more money, who can give more money, who have connections so they can get more money. So, of course, first of all, that's not the point of a board, nor is it the point of board members only. So this just shows that we need a little bit more work on governance.
So when you say it's not the point of a board, would you say that fundraising is an important responsibility of the board?
Okay, so you see, you've fallen into my trap. You're using board and board member interchangeably.
Okay.
So we recruit people to serve as board members.
Yeah.
And those board members all together in a room do governance.
Okay.
So when they're in the room and as a group, they can't fundraise. We're at a board meeting. What am I going to do? I'm the board chair. When I hit 3, I want you to all start fundraising.
Okay.
Okay. So, in fact, the single most important thing a board member does is go to board meetings and participate in the conversations in order to make governance decisions.
Yeah.
Now, as far as I'm concerned, the performance expectations of board members are all the same. Number 1, attend board meetings. Come prepared, having read the material, so you can have a strategic, meaningful conversation, make the right decisions as a group.
Okay.
2, give a personal financial contribution to the best of your personal ability every single year to support general operations. And if we do a special campaign, like a capital campaign, you have to give to that too. And your gift has to be unrestricted.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. What I hear all the time is it's all about bigger gifts, bigger donors. It's people who have the connections to then go ask their friends for a gift, which is such a silly idea. Okay, so, Cathy, my favorite charity is Planned Parenthood, and you're my dearest friend, and I have to sell some tickets to the event. I know you hate events, okay, but I just need you to buy the tickets, okay?
Yeah.
And then I'd also like a gift. And don't forget that, you asked me for a gift for your favorite charity, the opera,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't like opera, but I gave a gift because we're friends.
Right.
Now, both of us can hardly wait till the other one isn't on the board where we're not interested in giving.
Right.
You don't trespass on personal and professional relationships. Mm-hmm. You identify those you think might be interested, and then you introduce them to the charity. So The moral dilemma I see is, as I'll say again, we want people who can give us big gifts. We want people who will get their big gift friends and the president of the other bank, because you're the president of this bank. But the other bank, you golf with her or whatever. And then we're going to get a gift for them. So we've even made our boards be all about money and the size of money and the connections. So I think of those as a moral dilemma when philanthropy is supposed to be about voluntary action for the common good, and we're supposed to respect people no matter how much money they have, as far as I'm concerned. And we get board members on the board for other things other than money and connections. We want their expertise in certain areas to contribute to the conversation.
Sure. So I believe it was Carver who said that one of his biggest regrets was that he didn't say that board members really need to be hands-on engaged in fundraising. Right. And so I use fundraising deliberately instead of philanthropy. So in your model, where this is philanthropy's moral dilemma, where does that notion of board members being engaged in fundraising sit?
Well, in my performance expectations for board members, as I said, attend board meetings, come prepared, have the conversation, give a personal financial contribution, unrestricted, every year to the extent of your personal ability. Then I have a commitment form where they have to sign up for things they will do in fundraising. And then they will be graciously nagged to death by the development officer and the chair of the development committee and the board chair, if necessary, to do it. So, for example, make thank you calls.
Right. Okay.
Donor thank you calls. Serve on an event committee. I beg any board I sit on. I will do everything. But please don't make me sit on the event committee. But I will ask for gifts. I'll go with you.
Yeah, I do. You don't like events, do you?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
And so I say that. And usually, because I'll do everything else, they say, okay, you don't have to be on. But one time they said, no, we need you on the event committee too. And I said, okay, fine. And I pouted. So anyway, I think board members should be involved in relationship building, fundraising, identifying potential candidates for future board membership and committee membership. Absolutely. And as I say, I have a friggin' form. And they have to sign it and turn it in.
Just in case you're hearing that, Simone is picking up a piece of paper that she's pretending is a form. She's just ripped it.
And I believe development officers are nags. Gracious, lovely nags.
Gracious and lovely. I think that's important. Yeah. Okay. Any last
thoughts on
moral dilemmas that you want to, or should we move on to the next topic?
Yeah, let's move on to another topic.
All right. One of the things we had talked about prior to the recording started was this notion of professionalism.
Okay, so I think the nonprofit sector is not sufficiently respected.
Yeah.
I think that fundraising is not sufficiently respected.
Yeah. And so before we go on, do you have whys to why we're not sufficiently respected?
So I think that one of the reasons we're not sufficiently respected is because fundraising is something that evolved by people doing it.
Yeah.
And then writing books about it. I mean, think about it. I didn't go to school to be a fundraiser.
Yeah.
And did you go to school to be a fundraiser? No.
No.
So, I mean, I went to school to be a public school teacher.
Yeah.
So because there is no, or was no, back in the olden days, degree program or even master's program in fundraising, philanthropy, nonprofits, whatever. Now there's lots of them.
Yeah.
And so we learned by doing, but we learned by passing down information from other people.
Right.
Other people who were marvelous and wonderful. Heck, then you and I became some of the people passing down stuff through books, articles, podcasts, etc.
Yeah.
So, my understanding of the concept of a profession
is
that there's a body of knowledge and there's a lot of research.
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's some sort of certification, and we have the ACFRE and that sort of thing. But we've never had as much academic knowledge as I think we should have.
Right.
And I'm not even talking about whether you have to go to school in order to get a job. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that now we know with neuroscience and behavioral economics and philanthropic psychology now, because we have our first person in that we can hold ourselves up to saying there is academic knowledge, not just practice knowledge.
Yeah.
And to me, that's good. And one of the biggest reasons, well, there's two big reasons why it's good.
Yeah.
Number one, I think we would be better at our jobs.
If we had more research.
Yes, and if we had more academic knowledge as fundraisers, I think we could be better at our jobs.
Right. So one thing about that is that even though there is now a much bigger body of knowledge out there, of academic research out there, the piece that's still missing is access for practitioners. So it's still really hard to wade through, or A, to find it, and B, to wade through it if it's a big treatise.
So we actually need really good writers to take the academics writing and translate it.
Yeah.
And that's a really important thing. This is the sort of stuff we need to be learning. Application of an academic lens through things, which is operating at a slightly different level than a practitioner level.
So that's really important. And you didn't present at AFP Toronto's Congress last year. They rested you. But one of the things that I was invited to do was become the first chair of the first research track. So we incorporated academic research into the fundraising conference and had some conversations about what does it mean to be research. And I really wanted to make sure that that we were inviting people who could present academic research that was peer reviewed, that was robustly academic. So we're starting. There's a little shift disturbing thing.
That's good.
That we've done, and I hope others will take up that mantle and do it at their own conferences.
Absolutely. And then the other thing, which I hear, and you may hear this all the time as a consultant, is, no, I'm not reading this stuff. I don't have time.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, some of the research is really dense and hard to
I'm not even
get
talking
through.
about that.
Oh, okay. What are you
I'm
talking
about our sector, and all kinds of people I know working in the sector saying, we're small nonprofits, we don't have time to read that. There was a piece of, there was an article several years ago in the Chronicle of Philanthropy in the U.S. Where they were comparing fundraising research and consumer research, and that consumer research is being done and read and applied by for-profits and has for forever, right?
Yeah.
But that comparing nonprofits with the for-profits, our sector doesn't read the stuff. And so the conclusion of the article was, this is problematic.
Yeah.
And in the talk back, like people, writing
comments.
The comments, one guy said something like, we don't have time to read things because we're small organizations and we have to do the work. And it's like, oh, great. I want a fundraiser, just like I want my medical doctor.
To not stay on top of things.
Not stay on top of stuff. I mean, that's not what a professional does.
Yeah.
So a professional in anything, including grass cutting, knows the next new product. So anyway, when I think about a profession, I'm disappointed that we don't make room for our own learning, and that we don't start pushing back at organizations saying, you either give me some time to read or I'm not working for you. Now, that right there, however, is an unearned privilege comment, because it means that whoever's saying that can earn enough money that they can take that risk. And I'm aware of that. I just think I know too many people who say this. But I got to tell you, professionals, okay?
Yeah.
People who define themselves as professionals, and I'm not using that word lightly, people who define themselves as professionals aren't caught up in, I only read 300-word things. I only this, I only that.
So you've made me think of something, though, Simone. If people aren't being treated like professionals, or
Ooh,
not
good point.
perceived as professionals in the organizations they work for, then they don't necessarily have that same level of motivation to be reading the research.
Right. Well, so which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So I want to be in a position, I wanted to be when I was a staff person, I want to be able to say, well, the research says, or according to experts. Okay?
Yeah. Well, I guess all the more reason for us to be delivering research and even best practices in multiple different ways, right?
Yes.
So,
yes.
I mean, I think that one of the things that lots of people we know do is they take time to go to conferences. The reason that we're talking today is because tomorrow we're both speaking at a conference.
Right.
And we know that people have taken the time, they're going to take a day off work, and they're going to conferences. So if we're thinking about how we help the sector, then this notion of incorporating research into the conference material that we're delivering is a way to do that.
Right. Well, and to a large degree, some of this is about, do you choose as an individual to be a lifelong learner?
And listen to podcasts.
Precisely. So
I also remember being early in my career and working in small shops, and I felt like I didn't have time to read. Well, also early in my career, there wasn't as much to read. Let's be honest.
Right, of course not. Right.
25 years ago, there wasn't that much research about fundraising. But I think back to my best boss ever and what she did to, I don't know if she knows she did this, but what she did to support me in my professional development. And one of the things was that she provided me with time to do my CFRE. And the most important piece of that was that, I don't know what it's like now, but at the time there was a reading list of about a dozen books or something. And I remember reading those dozen books. And what I will say is that was a huge shift for me, because I went from being a fundraiser who knew how to do a number of discrete tasks within the world of fundraising, and it kind of galvanized for me this knowledge where I began to recognize that fundraising was not just a bunch of discrete tasks. And so I think it's important, and maybe this is something that we should be talking about more, is like, what can leaders do to support professionals early in their careers read and learn and access research that's out there.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, I think it kind of starts with the concept of lifelong learning.
Yeah.
Whether it's, instead of only, there's an old story about only ordering vanilla ice cream. And lifelong learners might try something other than vanilla.
Yeah. Just
to see, right? Or you try this, or you try that. It's the exploration of life, if you will. And I think you're right about, an interesting question is, to what degree and what ways do the leaders of anything owe to subsequent people?
Yeah.
And so how do we do that? And different people will do it different ways. Some people choose to say, well, if I go and present at conferences, I'll be able to help someone. Some people do a blog or a newsletter or podcasts with the idea that they're introducing thoughts to people and then saying, well, sure, you could go read this book about that or whatever. Everybody learns in different ways. So then conference attendance, workshop attendance, and you went to a 75-minute conference presentation and got two interesting ideas that then at some point a few months later you looked up on the internet and found 3 articles, and one was by somebody that you actually kind of knew, and so then you email them.
Right. So this brings up something really interesting. So Anne, my trusty podcast producer, often teaches me things in ways that I never could have imagined. So I was on a podcast, so I will plug it, Vitreo's Brain Trust podcast, and there were 3 or 4 of us speaking, and we were talking about, might have been about research and the lack of research, and we were all kind of complaining about it. And then afterwards, Anne said to me, it's kind of weird to me that like 4 leaders in the industry were complaining about something and not talking about how to fix it. And I thought, yeah, we do have a responsibility to do something about this stuff. We can't just complain about it.
So we could ask the trustee Anne.
Yeah.
And any number of other people, like, so what do you want? What do you need? I mean, how many senior fundraisers, or whatever we want to call this, mentor somebody?
Yeah.
How many people get tons and tons of emails from everywhere and anywhere around the world who aren't trying to hire you as a consultant or whatever, but you give them a bunch of free advice.
Right.
You spend 30 minutes responding to an email, or 2 hours talking on the telephone. And I will bet you that bunches of senior fundraisers or senior CEOs or whatever, I'll bet bunches of them do it, I guess.
Yeah, well, I like that. I mean, I think that if you're listening to this and you're a leader, I hope that you will think about what you're going to do to address some of the issues that we've been talking about, or issues that you feel strongly about that we haven't talked about today. And how are you going to be part of the solution? Well, Simone, this has been a wide-ranging conversation. Thank you so much. I'm delighted that you are in Toronto and that we got to do this podcast face-to-face. I always knew that I wanted you to be one of the guests, and when we had an opportunity to do it in person, I jumped at it.
Well, I'm thrilled that you asked me, and I love the shift-changing kinds of things. And we need to be really candid, I think, sometimes, and push the envelope.
I agree. And it was fun to talk shift with you.
When it was wonderful talking shift with you.
I say that as many times as I can.
Yes, I miss you. I miss you.
Aw, thank you. That's sweet. That was a wide-ranging conversation with some great topics and a little bit of debate thrown in there for good measure. If you liked what you heard, I hope you will subscribe. You can do it on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Make sure that you give us a rating and feel free to leave us a comment. As my mama used to say, it doesn't hurt to ask. The great music that you hear on this podcast is Dog Days by Isaac Joel. This podcast is produced by Poodle Party Productions, Good Girl Brandy, and Cathy Mann and Associates.